If you'll stand with me, we're going to have the scripture reading. It's taken from Revelation chapter 3, verses 7 through 13. To the angel of the church in Philadelphia write, the words of the Holy One, the true one, who has the key of David, who opens and no one will shut, who shuts and no one opens. I know your works. Behold, I have set before you an open door, which no one is able to shut. I know that you have little power, and yet you have kept my word and have not denied my name. Behold, I will make those of the synagogue of Satan, who say that they are Jews and are not, but lie. Behold, I will make them come and bow down before you, your feet, and they will learn that I have loved you. Because you have kept my word about patient endurance, I will keep you from the hour of trial that is coming on the whole world, to try those who dwell on the earth. I am coming soon. Hold fast what you have, so that no one may seize your crown. The one who conquers, I will make him a pillar in the temple of my God. Never shall he go out of it. And I will write on him the name of my God and the name of the city of my God, the new Jerusalem, which comes down from my God out of heaven, and my own new name. He who has an ear, let him hear what the Spirit says to the churches. Please be seated.
I'm Keith, and it's a privilege to be able to guide us together through God's Word. So if you've not turned in your Bibles yet to Revelation chapter 3, do so now. We'll look at verses 3 to 13 as has already been read. Doors are opportunities, oftentimes to protect us from things damaging or harmful things in the world, but they're also opportunities for change or growth and adventure. Kids hate locked doors. We childproof our homes, and those are the doors that kids want to get behind. We don't want them to drink the poison under the sink, but we got to protect them. But really, the kids are always thinking, "What's the adventure beyond? Where could we go? Don't keep me out of something that's exciting." Which is why I think, like the TV show "Let's Make a Deal" has been running for over 50 years. Because people dress up like kids and they show up enthusiasm, and the host is like, "Tell you what, I got a deal for you. You can choose this, or you can choose what's behind door number 1, 2, or 3, because it's a world of unbelievable adventure and surprise, or maybe shame and zonks, if you're familiar with the show at all. Well, in our text this morning, this is the metaphor that Jesus gives the church of Philadelphia and us. There's an open door. He's the one that opens a door and stands before us all and say, "This is it, one door. Walk through this. Will you? It's a good door because I opened it. No one can shut it. Will you follow me?" Even if it meant it wasn't easy. Well, we're continuing our series this morning we're calling Dear Church. Looking at the book of Revelation, which is a unique kind of book. If you're new to the Bible, it's all the way at the end, right before the book of maps. right? So it's kind of a tricky one. It's called apocalypse or apocalyptic literature. That's a way to describe the unique genre that it is. Apocalyptic literature is a way to be invited into thinking what is true now beyond all time for its impact in time, right? And John, Jesus' beloved disciple, is given this vision where the curtains of heaven are pulled back to get this picture of what's happening with Jesus' victorious reign in all time, so that there would be encouragement to the church and the churches in time. And there are quite a few things that the churches in the day of this book written need to hear. We were looking at Philadelphia this morning, one of 7 churches that are collected here with letters, which is to say, even their inclusion in this book is not to say the letter to each church is just for that church alone. Right? They're all struggling with some similar themes. There's increasing oppression, opposition, not only within the culture, the emperor worship that was encouraging the church to stand against, but there was also like tribal kind of supremacist thinking that was going on. We see this in the church of Philadelphia between the Jews who call themselves Jews but really aren't, and the Philadelphians. But there's also temptations that the church needed to be exhorted to avoid, like towards kind of giving in to cultural values or getting lukewarm in their expressions of faith, we'll hear in another church, the Laodicea. But these church letters are for us because today we need to hear a similar message, to be encouraged what's true beyond all time for our church and for the churches in our day. Like, for instance, this is why I think we need to hear these messages. Did you know the number of folks that call themselves Christian, particularly in America, has been on the decline for decades? Yes, if you've been reading the news, you know that's the case. However, the number of the folks that have given up on participating in church, that has decreased rapidly, even in the last 20 years. Like prior to that time, folks would come to church three plus Sundays a month. But prior to the pandemic, it was down to like 1.8 times a month. I don't know how you do 1.8 times a month. Maybe you come twice and you take a little snooze. Totally understand it. If that's what you need, feel free. But we see, no. What's happening now post-pandemic? I mean, rapid decrease. Christians participate 1.2 Sundays a month. Translated into stats, 90% of churches in America are in some state of decline. And that's without any major issue going on, like a change in leadership or transition or unique kind of struggles or social pressures in that context. In other words, it's ripe for cynicism to grow. Folks leave churches without resolving conflicts, personal or generally against leadership generically, or specifically church leadership and all of its unique kind of quirks. There's a message to the 7 churches that's for all the churches. It's for us specifically here this morning, and we want to look at Philadelphia. This is a picture of ancient Philadelphia. I put that up there precisely to not confuse you with Philadelphia, that city in Pennsylvania that has incredible football fans, and I just want to acknowledge, having lived outside of Philadelphia for a while, not a fan, you guys won the first half. So you can kind of keep that in mind. Philadelphia, like love, brotherly love, city, I always heard it called as the city of brotherly shove when I lived outside of that. This Philly was very different. It did not have a sense of chest pounding that's notorious for Philadelphia fans. It's a very impoverished, poor, rural town. Part of that was its geographical location. It sat on major fault lines for earthquakes. In fact, today, there's the terrible, terrible mounting tragedy of 25,000, I think, individuals now who have died with earthquakes in Turkey and Syria, all because of this area. Can you imagine being in a city that's always rebuilding and rebuilding and rebuilding and rebuilding? What kind of emotional financial impact that would have. They're impoverished. But they were also being particularly picked on by wealthy Jews established for a long time from the diaspora who were saying, look, you upstart Christians, you're not really a part of the kingdom. We can learn from Philadelphia because they actually endured. In fact, of the 7 churches, there's only 2 where Jesus doesn't really say anything negative. That's this church, one of them. The structure of this letter falls in line with the other 7. There's usually a description of who Jesus is, and he's the one that opens a door. There's a specific exhortation to the church in light of its geographical, historical, spiritual context. And there's a promise for enduring and a promise for Christ's provision. To get more specific in the exhortation, it's positive and negative. To the church at Philly, Jesus says, you've kept my word. And we'll dive into what that means. But just know that it's God's unchanging word that is sure in all times of uncertainty, in all times of trial. That it's to point to the living word, Jesus Christ, which is exactly what you see on display, even in a letter to the Philadelphians like this. The opposite side of that is spending time in the word stiffens you. It strengthens you so that when the pressures to turn away for all sorts of reasons, external pressure or internal temptation, you can not deny Jesus' name. But there's a single command. There's only one imperative. You know, when you're looking at a passage, you want to examine it and think, well, what's the command? Let's start there. There's only one command in this entire text, and it is hold fast. Verse 11. Hold fast because you've already kept my word. And what was the word? The word was about patient endurance. Hupomone. Don't you love it when preachers use Greek words and you think, man, so help me out and say it with me. Hupomone, ready? Hupomone. Now you know. Mone, or meno, is actually a word that means abide or remain. Be steadfast. Hupo is the under. Remain under pressure. I mean, remain steadfast even when things are bearing down on you. Hupomone. Don't you want to be that kind of person? That person of strength and endurance and durability? Whatever you may be facing this week, even right now. Maybe you're here this morning realizing that there is unresolved conflict in your workplace, or maybe in your bedroom. Or maybe it's just an overwhelming feeling of loneliness that can lead toward despair, being disconnected from a sense of purpose in the world. Uncertainty in your job, a struggle with sickness, or maybe a debilitating sin pattern. Maybe it's just as a church member. Here we go again. I'm wrestling with cynicism. Whatever you face, do you want to be a person of endurance, of hupomone? Hold fast. Well, the answer is found in what Jesus provides as an open door. He says, come through this open door. It's a gift. And Jesus is giving lots of gifts in this text. But this is what I want us to consider in this passage and the message to Philadelphia for us. Every follower of Jesus Christ can endure because Jesus opens a door that invites us to 2 things. It's an open door that forms us through our difficulties. You might even say transforms us through our difficulties. But it also firms us because he's reigning. If I created a word, I'd say he transforms us. He transforms us and transfirms us. First, the open door that Jesus invites us to transforms us. Well, let's talk just about what that open door would be. You know, the metaphor of an open door, the Apostle Paul uses in the New Testament when he asks people to pray for him. Give me an open door in Macedonia, or something like that. It's usually a prayer for an opportunity to share the gospel or a ministry advance. And this metaphor is not excluding that, but it's different. It is bigger in a way. That the open door here is basically an invitation into the kingdom. That's what's at stake. That's what people are fighting about. Who's in, who's not in. And even the way it's presented with Jesus, the authoritative one, he's got the key of David, the messianic promises fulfilled. You know, in the ancient world, where you didn't have Ring doorbells and smart locks. You didn't even have locks on most of the doors. Hospitality was a thing that culturally you could have access to somebody's home just by virtue of the fact that it wasn't locked. Unless it was a wealthy home, someone of influence and power. They could afford to lock things. And then the steward who's given the king or given the key, you get to wear it around, has unbelievable authority. That's the image. That's the metaphor. Jesus is the one who's got the key of the very kingdom of God. He opens a door, no one will shut it, which means he is authoritative. That's where we have to start with this text. Just like we did in starting this service, reading and praying together Philippians 2, where every knee will bow. He's the authoritative one. He invites us into humility because he's the one who has great authority over all things. I know this is a bit of a bubble buster to say this, but did you realize we really weren't in control of our lives the way we think we are? I mean, there's so many ways this is true. How many of you actually chose your parents? Come on. And would you? Again, don't answer that one. We didn't choose where we live. We didn't choose our gifts, our intelligence. We didn't choose our sexuality or gender. That's all given to God. Gives those things. See, when God gives us difficulties, he's actually inviting us first to humility because he's ready to give us more and more and more. But we got to get over the fact that we think we deserve it and own it and get it on our own. Look at the text. He's the one who opens and no one will shut. I have set before you, right? I know. I will make them come and bow down. I've loved you. I will keep you. I will make them a pillar. I will write on. Do you see the idea? I'm authoritative and I'm giving you all of these things. First, humility. But then when you move in that direction of humility, find out that difficulties transform our weaknesses. Look at verse 8. I know your works. Behold, I've set before you an open door, which no one's able to shut. I know that you have but little power. Now that's kind of a quirky phrase. Reading it literally, it'd be like, I know your works, which by the way, let me pause and say, that could be very encouraging or intimidating when you think about it. And from the picture of the curtains of heaven pulled back, he knows all of our works, past, present, future, haunting or thrilling. But he literally says, I know your works, you puny little weak people. Now we dare not interpret that as if God would somehow shame those he made in his image. He's actually describing their situation. They are poor comparatively. They are overlooked. They're trying to make things work in a world where the ground is constantly shifting on them. They're being oppressed, not only by the Roman Empire with increasing power, but also these folks from the synagogue of Satan, which is really strong stuff. But Jesus is like, you're weak. I know that. But he's not shaming them in it. Their weakness is actually an opportunity. Behold, I'll make those of the synagogue of Satan who say they're Jews and are not, but lie. Behold, wait a second. How many of you followed like the congressional elections last year in the fall? George Santos from New York. This is not a political illustration. This is a character illustration, right? It's a character illustration. Because it's shown he's lied about a lot of things on his resume. One of which was his heritage, although growing up Catholic. He said, hey, my mother was Jewish and my grandparents actually survived Nazism. And when somebody pushed into that, he goes, well, they were like Jew-ish, right? There was a sense that being Jew-ish provided him a sense of authority or privilege. There's a relation to this text in that. Because these Jews who really weren't, because what are Jews ultimately would be of the promise of God to his people, which ultimately would recognize the promise of the Messiah now in Jesus Christ. But the very fact that they would take a tribal pride and have a supremacist thinking over the poor Philadelphian church, right? They're like, Jesus is saying clearly, I know your works, Philly, and I know them, they're not really mine. I see your weakness, he says. You may be oppressed in all sorts of ways, but the goal here is not to take your oppression and make you now the powerful. Jesus wants us to acknowledge our weakness because in our weakness, his strength is made known. He wants us to abide in him. He wants us to remain in him even in our weakness. That's meno, right? In fact, Jesus even says this in John 15 when he's praying with his disciples. If you abide in me and my words abide in you, ask whatever you wish and it will be done for you. And if we're weak, we're thinking, yes, I want everything I can to change my circumstances, but that's not the context, because Jesus continues in verse 10, if you keep my commandments, if you obey, if you abide in my love, just as I've kept my Father's commandments and abide in his love. If you meno in me, you can hupomeno in the world. But it's your weakness that enables my strength to be revealed in you. Oh, how we turn away from that. It's almost like I want to think that the open door to the kingdom that Jesus has for us is just a little bit lower than our height. And you got to step down to get in. And then to keep moving into the kingdom, it's like the door gets lower and lower. And we should think that is freedom, not oppression. Because Jesus, the one with the open door, transforms our weakness. The Apostle Paul, by the way, this is an interesting little testimonial he provides in the end of 2 Corinthians. 2 Corinthians chapter 12. He's a dude who could boast, right? I mean, he wrote Romans. I know we are intimidated, but he's a dude that could boast. In fact, in one case, he almost did. He went impersonal third person in describing this illustration. He's like, I once knew a man who went up to the third heaven. I don't know what that means, but the idea of like he saw something like heaven's curtains pulled back. And folks would be like, tell me, we could write a book and a movie, it'd be incredible. He's like, no, I'm not gonna tell you those things. It's improper for me to tell, why is that? Well, because actually, I had this ministry calling and I had this nasty thorn in the flesh that just won't be relieved. And I prayed 3 times, Lord, take it away. In verse 9 of 2 Corinthians chapter 12, this is the message Paul gets from God. My grace is sufficient for you. My power is made perfect in weakness. Therefore, I will boast all the more gladly of my weakness, so that the power of Christ may rest upon me. You see, weakness is transformed into Christ's strength when we enter the open door. I don't know how many of you have been watching the news that there's been a revival taking place in Asbury Seminary in Kentucky for 11 days now. Incredible moment of prayer. And it started with students who've been preparing in prayer just at a normal chapel meeting, at the end of which, let's just stay around and keep praying and sing. And they are spontaneously singing and praying, and people are giving and providing like food and drink, and it's going on for 11 days. And it's a small town, really, and so there's like lineup of cars for hours to get into town. There's like a lineup of people to get into the chapel where it's happening. There was even a story I read of a national, well-known worship leader who called and said, hey, I can come and do music for you guys. And you know what the response was? We got it. Humility. In a world of youthful anxiety, there's a sense of shalom and peace taking place there. In a world of longing for power, there's a sense of no. God's at work, even in our weakness and humility. You see, if you want to follow Jesus through the open door and be transformed to endure, he'll turn our weakness into strength. It's really amazing. And then he transforms our world through it, continuing in verse 9. Behold, I will make the synagogue of Satan Jews, I will make them come and bow down before your feet, and they will learn that I've loved you. This is really, really remarkable. Enemies are transformed into friends. I don't know where exactly it might land. Just as we read in Philippians, every knee will bow, right? Whether or not they're bowing in reaction or they're bowing along with in adoration, there's a sense of that what's happening on earth is going to be transformed. Jesus takes our difficulties. He transforms even the world. We take the mess of the world and he can turn it into worship. It's unbelievable. And how does he do it? Again, it's not by taking the oppressed and making them now at the top. He takes people who are willing to acknowledge their weakness, and he fills them with his love. That's pretty profound. Humility, weakness, opens us up to be filled with Christ's love. That by then loving one another in this room, and the witness of that love in the world would transform the watching world. Who would ever think of such a strategy? But this is the way we become more human. You know, when animals get sick, weak, and suffering, we start thinking about how do we put them down? When humans experience difficulties and sickness, God is there to say, I want to make you more human. I want to fill you more with me. If you trust that I can transform your weakness into my strength, I can even transform your world. But there's a third way. Going through the door transforms us. It transforms our faith. You know, I don't know if you could ever determine how strong you are by lying on your bed and saying, I feel like I'm in good shape. I don't think you prepare for running a marathon by sitting on the couch and watching runners, right? Similarly with the spiritual life, you don't know how patient you can be, how courageous you can be, how sacrificially loving you can be, how much you can give, unless God puts you in a place where you're forced to depend on him, and those things become alive in you in ways you would never imagine. It's a long way of saying conflict reveals what we love more than Jesus. That's true for individuals and communities. But the point of it is, Jesus takes our fear, our wimpy, fragile faith, and he transforms it into something that shines. David writes in a prayer in Psalm 27, the Lord is my light and my salvation, and whom shall I fear? The Lord's the stronghold of my life, of whom shall I be afraid? Which is to say, if there's anything but the Lord that's giving you light in salvation, it'll crumble. But what Jesus provides for us is a transformation of our faith because the world is transformed and our very bodies and weaknesses transformed when we go through the open door of the kingdom that he gives us. Now you may be thinking, wait a minute, Keith, you're getting ahead of yourself. I keep hearing you say troubles and suffering and trials can make you humbler, but they can also make you go crazy. Have you ever felt that? Maybe they can make you more human, but I've kind of experienced they kind of can make me grow harder instead of softer. Instead of making me more strong and firm, they can kind of make me more sorrowful, even despairing. And you're not wrong. We know lots of people with those stories. Maybe you have experienced that as well. So how do we become attentive to actually walking through the door to see our difficulties transformed? It's because we have to know how Jesus transforms us. He transforms us through his reign. Look at verse 11. I'm coming soon. Stop. That's an incredible promise that wouldn't we all like to just sing Maranatha? Lord, why not today? Today's a great day. It's a beautiful day. Come back now. When he's promising an imminent return, he's not necessarily saying, mark your calendars. In a way, remember the curtains pulled back on eternity. He's saying there is nothing else that Jesus needs to do to complete his work of salvation. It's available for us all. I'm coming soon. It's available for you. Hold fast our command. Hold fast to what you have so that none may seize your crown. What an incredible image. The victor's crown, the garland of victory for running the race well. And it's not our victory, it's Jesus' victory. He says to the one who conquers, but he's the one that conquered the grave, put to death sin and death itself. But it continues, the one who conquers, I'll make him a pillar in the temple of my God. A pillar. I mean, isn't that a great metaphor in somebody that lives in the worst earthquake zone in the world? With buildings even in Syria, dust next to one that's standing firm. Wouldn't you want to be in the one that's standing firm? And Jesus is saying, I'll make you that pillar. I'll make you stand strong, a pillar of truth even in a world of kind of despair and confusion. I'll do that for you, but it's not just, again, earthly strength. It's a temple where you're identified with Jesus' very presence. Look, the temple of my God, the name of my God, the city of my God, the Jerusalem, my God, my God. 4 times, that's ultimately what transforms us. It's our identity. It's our identity in Jesus Christ. Here's a summary way to think of it. When you consider difficulties and trials, suffering even, you know, there's like the romantics. The romantics might say to trials and difficulties this shouldn't be happening to me. Life shouldn't be so hard. And so what happens? You end up suffering with despair. It's the stoic, right? The stoic that believes, the world is happening, there's sovereignty at work, it's beyond me. I can't control it. Nothing to do about it. The best I can do is keep my chin up and suffer with dignity. But ultimately, it doesn't mean anything. Christianity has an answer to the problems of difficulty and suffering in the world like no other system of faith or belief. Because it says we can suffer with hope. Why? Because Jesus is victorious. He reigns. And no matter what difficulties you may face, they pale in comparison to the one who opens a door for us because he's the only one that came into our world to be locked out of the presence of God so that we would never be locked out. He took on the flesh of humanity, its weakness. More so, he took upon the role of a slave. He took upon the penalty of our sin and the sin and rebellion of the entire world. He was locked out of heaven so that in trusting him, we would never be locked out. Even more, he hung on a cross, paid the penalty of our sin. He didn't deserve, we did. He hupomoned on the cross. The door we walk through is marked with blood, his blood shed. He even is the door, he says in John 10. I'm the door. I'm the door of the sheep. If anyone enters by me, he'll be saved to go in and out and find pasture. Have you gone through this door? Let me tell you a story. Our church has one of the most incredible ministries to individuals and families struggling with disabilities, hidden and invisible, or special needs ministry in the country. It really is true. Hopefully you've experienced the blessing of that by participation and volunteering. Night to Shine was a couple of weekends ago. And by the way, there's an opportunity to volunteer in respite coming up in a couple of months. But Night to Shine was a couple of weeks ago. I was visiting with a member of the church, and she was telling me the story that she signed up to be a coach on that evening, right? There are all kinds of people volunteering in all sorts of ways in that evening where you welcome the folks that get overlooked in the world. The least and the lowly are brought in onto a night where they're celebrated. It's a night to shine. And she signed up to be a coach, assigned to this one woman who really had a hard time verbalizing. And my friend was talking about, it was really difficult. I had a list of questions, try to get to know. I got one-word answers and look away in shame. And it was really troubling until the moment that the crown was put on her head. When the crown was put on her head, she went from one-word answers to making declarations. I want food. I want this kind of food. I want you to bring it to me now. Let's go dance. It was the crown that transformed and transformed her. Yeah, there's disability and difficulty. The Lord's at work in that. I don't know how he's going to relieve it. He'll make it all new someday. But that crown transformed her. Now, it doesn't matter what the names are because the story's the same for everyone here who chooses to follow Jesus Christ. You get the crown. It transforms you. It enables you to see in difficulty the open door that makes you more like Jesus. And when you know that he's reigning over all things and in you, gosh, you can stand up, you can endure, you can hupomone in whatever the Lord would bring your way. Whether or not it's in your life individually or for our church in this season, in the season ahead. I want to invite Kyle up. We're going to sing a song. We're going to pray. Then we're going to go out an open door with the blessing of God. Let's pray.